So here we are at Harvey and Hudson, and we're very fortunate today to be able to have a little chat with Richard Harvey, who's one of the co-owners of Harvey and Hudson. And this is one of the most established brands on Jermyn Street, one of the most renowned brands on excellent classic menswear around. And I know you basically specialize in jackets and trousers, but that's changed a bit over the last.
Well, yeah, it was always business wear and weekend casual, and now of course that's morphed into the weekend casuals, because it's kind of morphed into the week now. So there's a lot more of interest in combinations instead of suits. So suits still sell, mostly for occasions though, and serious business meetings, but of course jackets and trousers, a gentleman can go into an office in a suit and they won't know whether it's the same suit as yesterday or not. If he keeps on going in with the same jacket and trousers, it's obvious. So he has to vary it.
This is a wonderful tonal range. It's all sort of softened and, you know, a little bit relaxed, and it's not in your face kind of. It's very gorgeous and works really well. And do your colours change every season?
We go to the shows and we make sure that we pick up on highlight colours. You know, that's always important. People are aware of it, or they might not realise, but they are going to move towards certain colours because it's in the marketplace. So we pick up on those, and of course, you know, navy is gravy. That is where
I love that.
And that always sells. But yeah, we always keep it changing, you know, and it's the fun. I would get bored if I didn't keep changing it as well, but the customer certainly would already have it.
Well, the
if
colours,
I didn't move on.
The colours draw you in, you know, they always have.
For sure.
Tell us about the background to Harvey and Hudson. It was your grandfather's business, right?
Yeah, it was my grandfather's, and Andrew, who's also here, is his grandfather's. My grandfather ran the Jermyn Street shirt makers down the road, which is now defunct, but he ran that, and the cutter was his friend George. So Tom, his friend, was George, and they decided they'd want to do it on their own. Now Andrew and I are taking over with Lee, who is one of the Hudsons as well, and she runs the administration behind it. So 70 years. I must say, I remember walking past the cheese shop and thinking, oh, that's a strong smell. I can remember it being very small. I can remember being maybe 4 or 5 coming in here. And, you know, it used to smell of tobacco because people smoked in here. It was a very, you know, and you could, the whole atmosphere I still remember. And it's bizarre to think that I'm actually working here now.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Richard. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So here we are on Jermyn Street outside Floris. And Floris is one of the most famous perfumers in the world. It's mentioned in several films like Sin of a Woman. It's been worn by numerous film stars and prime ministers and kings and czars, and it is just an institution on Jermyn Street. And what's more, of course, it's one of the oldest perfume shops in the world. This shop right here was built in 1730. And the whole exterior, the carving, even the rail was here in 1730. And this would have been where people tied their horses up on Jermyn Street. Of course, you see the beautiful brass front with the name Floris. It has been in the same family's hands since 1730. And I believe that's 9 generations of the Floris family. So it is something very, very precious. The perfumes used to be made down here in the basement. This wonderful shop got its first royal warrant in 1820. And if you look up, you can see it, the seal with the lion and the unicorn. And it received that royal warrant from George IV and it was actually then for combs, pointed combs. So people used to come here not only for the fragrances, but to have their hair cut and to buy, combs and hairbrushes and even toothbrushes. It's said that Mary Shelley, when she was in Italy, wrote a letter to florists back in the early 19th century saying, please send me 2 toothbrushes and a hairbrush. So people had to do that back in those days. Anyway, it's always been known for excellence. So come with me and we'll find out more. So here we are inside at Florist, looking at some of the fantastic classic fragrances that they have been celebrated for centuries, seriously. And we're with Kevin, and we want to ask you about some of these incredible fragrances.
Yeah, so we have number 89, which is our signature scent for gents.
Yeah.
And it's called number 89, which is our door number.
Yeah.
And it's really famous because it's related to Ian Fleming and James Bond. So you have like some sandalwood and cedarwood, like a bit of oak moss, neroli is a top notes.
Yeah. And
it's like an old-fashioned barbershop cologne. So
yeah.
it's quite good, yeah.
Tell us about limes.
Limes was actually the first fragrance ever made here in Flores. It's really clean and sharp.
Yeah. So this was an 18th century fragrance. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And it was unisex from the beginning?
Unisex, yeah, because it's really clean, because back in the days it was like more to cover the smell than the smell good.
Exactly, covering the body odor.
Yeah, exactly.
People weren't bathing in the 18th century, not very much, and limes was perfect. Yeah, it was. I think it was created in the summer. And so the smells were really bad, and suddenly it was a solution. Of course, limes was this rare, exotic fruit in London in the 18th
because
century.
It was inspired by the owner back in the days, because it's actually from Menorca in Spain, and he was missing all these fragrances from his land.
Oh, it's beautiful. And then 127. That was Churchill's fragrance.
Churchill's,
right,
but actually originally made for the Duke of Russia.
The Duke of Orloff, I believe. Yeah.
And it's called Special Number 127 because in our books that that we have in the back is in the page number 127. It's really nice and fresh. It's the sandalwood and cedarwood.
Every time I smell this, I think of Churchill and his cigars and how would it have worked with tobacco, or somehow it would have been.
A lot of people say that they don't expect this scent. So.
And I believe Eva Peron also wore this.
Eva Peron as well.
And I also read that Noel Coward in 1934 went crazy for 127. So people don't think Noel Coward and Winston Churchill, they're very, very different types, but actually they all united around 127. Exactly. Fantastic. Well, it's beautiful in here as always. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you. So here we are in St. James Church. It was built in the late 17th century, and in the 18th century it was the most popular church in London to attend. In fact, it was considered the best dressed church in all of London, and so people would flock here, not just to hear the sermon, I'm afraid, but to look at the gorgeous dresses on the women and the incredible coats that the men would have been wearing at that time. And in fact, it was so popular that people had to buy tickets to get a seat here. So it was the place to see and to be seen. So I'm going to welcome you here to St. James Square. So come on in with me. This square was built in the 1670s, 1680s, and it was all paid for, all laid out, the whole plan was made by Henry Jermyn. And this was because in 1660, after England had fought a terrible civil war, Charles II was brought back, to become the King of England, and he bequeathed all of the land that makes up this area, St. James, to Henry Jermyn. So when Henry Jermyn received this land, he immediately said, okay, I'm going to lay out a square, streets, and I'm going to name one street after myself, Henry Jermyn, Jermyn Street. And in this beautiful square, I'm going to have it look, kind of like some of the gorgeous squares in old Paris, where back in the day, all of the buildings matched, and there was actually a pond in the middle of this square. And you can see in old engravings where there's gentlemen being carried in sedan chairs, being brought around the square. So it was always a very elegant area of town. Now it's more office buildings, but we still very much feel Henry Jermyn's presence. So I want to give you a little bit of background about Henry Jermyn. He was a courtier in the court of Charles I, and in 1625, Charles I married Henrietta Maria. She was a French princess coming over to London, did not speak a word of English. And Charles I's mate, his top advisor, the Duke of Buckingham, was nervous that the Queen had so many followers, so many priests and lovely ladies surrounding her who were all, French compatriots. And so the Duke told the King, don't sleep with your wife. And Charles I followed the Duke of Buckingham's advice. The result was the Queen was left pretty isolated for 3 years, especially when most of her ladies-in-waiting were shipped back to France, because it didn't look good in the English court to have all these people around. And that's when Henry Jermyn, who spoke fluent French, stepped in and essentially became a very close intimate of the Queen. And many people think their intimacy was sexual and that it endured the whole of the Queen's life. After the Duke of Buckingham died in 1628, Charles I changed his mind, decided he would go and sleep with his wife, and he knew about the rumors about Henry Jermyn, but he was never able to catch Jermyn in the act. It's said that he tried at least twice, and one time the page, who was the cousin of Henry Jermyn, pushed open the door of the Queen's bedroom, dropped a candle, and Henry Jermyn was able to escape out the window. So anyway, it is also said that the Queen must have been able to keep at least 2 men very happy for many decades. But many people think that Charles II was the son of Henry Jermyn, not the son of Charles I. And one reason they think that is because Henry Jermyn was over 6 feet, and Charles I was just barely over 5 feet. Charles II, likewise, was over 6 feet. So I'm standing next to a statue of Beau Brummel, and he is actually the most important man in the history of Western men's dress. Basically, the reason guys are still wearing black suits at the Oscars, the reason our idea of most gorgeous formal dress is men in dark suits, is thanks to Beau Brummel. Now, Beau Brummel took the cutaway coat, the English country riding coat, turned it into a thing of beauty. And this is all in about 1799, 1800, 1801. And Beau Brummel's was midnight blue. No longer could men wear the beautiful powder pink, powder blue satin silk suits that they'd worn in the 18th century. Instead, he wanted everybody in dark blue wool suits. And this, of course, beautifully shows off his figure. With this, you wore flesh or buff-colored trousers. So very slim cut, and then, but also very manly, because then you'd have your boots at the bottom, your Hessian boots. So it was a sit-up straight kind of outfit, with great emphasis on the shoulders, big lapels, and he would often have a corset on, so it was tight in the waist, or it would be, the waistcoat would have straps in the back. He also wore a fantastic top hat and strode around the town. But he didn't stride around the town without spending hours on his toilette. It's said that he spent 5 hours a day in his apartment in Mayfair getting ready to strut around the streets of Mayfair. And he was quite a figure. He was a member of White's Club up on St. James Street, and he, along with his mates, would stand in the window, and they're said to be the first fashion police, because they'd stand there in the window and they'd mock the way everyone was dressed as they'd walk by. But Brummel's biggest joke of all was on the King, George IV. The King, who loved to dress up, was getting very embarrassed at the fact that he was putting on a lot of weight. And one time, he and his companion passed Brummel, and Brummel completely ignored the King and turned to his companion, Lord Alvanley, and said, "Who's your fat friend?" And the King was so angry at what Brummel had said that he never spoke to him again. So Jermyn Street is always fun to walk on, This is where men have come for centuries for beautiful shirts, beautiful ties, beautiful suits. And it's just lovely to walk down this street and kind of pretend that Beau Brummel's alive and well. And at least it's fun to dress up your clothes, show off your clothes, and feel very smart.